In a place built to remember heroes, he was the one man they refused to see. Before the gleaming gates of the Annapolis Naval Academy, where the honor of a nation was etched in stone, Silas Thorne was told no. The system had a name for him: an anomaly, a ghost without credentials. To the young Marine Guard, a gatekeeper of official memory, the man before him was just a problem to be solved. The guard saw a faded uniform from a war that existed only in history books. He did not see the soul of the Navy standing right in front of him, stooped not by a lack of pride, but by the sheer gravity of a promise he had carried for over 50 years. "Sir, this is a private ceremony," the Marine stated, his voice a flat line of practiced authority. His sunglasses were a black mirror, reflecting the flawless Maryland sky, the soaring chapel spire, and the immaculate dress uniforms of the admirals and senators who swept past in gleaming town cars. "I need to see your credentials. There are no exceptions." The old man, Silas Thorne, didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a wallet or offer a name. His eyes, the pale, faded blue of a winter ocean, were fixed on the procession. He was watching a river of glory flow past him, a torrent of polished brass, starched whites, and medals that shone like captured suns. They were here to bury a Titan, Admiral Harrison Vance, a man who had commanded fleets and bent the will of nations. And Silas was here to say goodbye to Harry, the kid he'd pulled from a fire. In his weathered hand, he cradled a small, tarnished silver compass. It was heavy, its surface dulled by the touch of 1,000 anxious nights. It wasn't an award, it was a promise, a silent testament. "I don't have credentials," Silas said, his voice quiet, raspy with disuse. "I served with him." The Marine's jaw tightened. "Served with him" was a meaningless phrase today. Today was about lists, databases, and clearances. You were either in the system or you were not. This man was not. "I'm sorry, sir. You need to step away from the gate. You're welcome to watch from across the street." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Silas gave a single, slow nod, a gesture of profound and weary acceptance. He wasn't a fighter, not anymore. He didn't protest or raise his voice. He simply shuffled back, finding a spot by the cold, unforgiving stone wall, a sentinel of forgotten history. He became what the world had long decided he was: invisible. Honor is a strange thing. Sometimes it shouts from the headlines, and sometimes it whispers from the shadows. Sometimes the greatest debts are the ones no one else can see. If you believe those quiet debts deserve to be honored, press the like button and join us in remembering the heroes who walk among us unseen. From his vantage point at the chapel's grand entrance, Admiral Jax McKinley felt a sudden chill, a discord in the day's solemn harmony. As a four-star admiral and the deceased's oldest friend, he was the master of this ceremony, the anchor of its grief. He greeted the Secretary of the Navy, shook hands with a senator, and offered a grim nod to a foreign attaché. Yet his eyes, honed by a lifetime of seeing what others missed, kept drifting toward the gate. He saw the old man. He saw the faded uniform. He saw the dismissal. It was a common enough sight at these events. Old veterans, their memories stirred, wanting to feel a part of something one last time. Jax's instinct was to dismiss it, to focus on the eulogy he was about to deliver. But he couldn't. There was something in the old man's stillness, a profound and absolute patience. It was the patience of a man who had waited in the dark under the crushing weight of 1,000 feet of water for a fire to burn itself out. Then the sun caught the object in the man's hand, a flash of silver, a compass. The polished facade of Admiral Jax McKinley cracked. The air in his lungs turned to ice. 57 years collapsed into a single, searing heartbeat. The formal hymn from the chapel faded, replaced by a different sound. The scream of twisting metal, the roar of an engine room fire, the terrifying claustrophobic silence of a submarine dying at the bottom of the world. The compass. Harry's compass. The one he always said was his soul's true north. The one he'd given away after the fire on the Triton. Jax's mind reeled. It can't be. Not him. Not Doc. The medics from that time were all gone, lost to time, to history, to the quiet towns they'd vanished into. He'd tried to find him. Harry had tried for years, hiring private investigators, pulling old service records, but Silas Thorne had disappeared as if he'd never existed, leaving behind only redacted files and the ghosts of his heroism. "Admiral?" his aide murmured beside him. "Is everything all right, sir?" Jax didn't hear him. He was staring at the old man, and the face was no longer a blur. It was the face of the young corpsman, impossibly calm amidst the chaos, his eyes clear and steady, even as smoke and fear choked the air. The face of the man who had wrapped his own jacket around Jax's head to shield him from the flames. The man whose own hands were blistering on a red-hot valve wheel as he forced open a path to life. A cold, righteous fury surged through Jax. Protocol, credentials, lists. They were blasphemy in the face of the debt he was looking at. The entire ceremony, this grand theater of remembrance, was a lie if that man was kept outside the gates. They were all there to honor the fruit of a tree, while the man who had planted it and watered it with his own blood was being told to stand across the street. "Find out who that man is," Jax commanded, his voice a low growl that made his aide snap to attention. "We're trying, sir. He's not in any system." "Then your system is broken." Jax's voice cut through the air like shrapnel. He straightened his uniform, not for show, but like a warrior preparing for battle. He looked at the flag-draped casket waiting on the dais, a symbol of a life lived to its fullest. A life that would have ended in a fiery steel tomb if not for the ghost at the gate. The eulogy was dead on his tongue. The polite words of remembrance turned to ash in his mouth. There was only one truth that mattered today, and it wasn't written on the program. It was standing 100 yards away, patient and invisible. And Admiral Jackson McKinley, in a move that would stun the Navy's elite and send shockwaves through the Pentagon, turned his back on the casket, on the Secretary of Defense, on half a century of rigid tradition. He began to walk. Each step was heavy, deliberate. He wasn't just walking to the gate. He was marching back through time to pay a debt that was long, long overdue. And the fire he felt now wasn't from a memory. It was the fire of a mission he had to complete. The manicured lawns of Annapolis might as well have been a field of ash. The solemn naval hymn reaching Admiral Jax McKinley's ears was drowned out by a sound only he could hear. The hellish shriek of metal under pressure, a sound that had haunted the edges of his sleep for 57 years. Each step he took across the perfect grass was a step through a memory of fire and darkness. The world saw a 4-star admiral defying protocol, a pillar of naval tradition inexplicably walking away from his post. But Jax felt like the young, terrified lieutenant he once was, marching toward the only man who had ever seen his soul stripped bare. The past wasn't a memory. It was a scar, and the sight of Silas Thorne at the gate had torn it wide open. It came back in a suffocating rush. The USS Triton, a ghost of cold steel gliding beneath the Arctic ice. They were gods in that silent world, masters of a billion-dollar machine, untouchable. They were young, immortal, and utterly blind to the fragility of their existence. Jax and his friend, Harrison Vance, were running a diagnostic in the aft torpedo room when the world ended. It began not with a bang, but with a sickening lurch, a low groan from the ship's steel bones. The lights flickered, buzzed, and died, plunging them into a primal, disorienting blackness. Then came the smell, acrid smoke, melting plastic, the scent of fear itself. The alarms blared, a frantic, mechanical scream. "Fire! Fire in the engine room! All hands to damage control!" An explosion rocked the sub, throwing them against a bulkhead. A wave of heat and black, toxic smoke blasted through the corridor. The emergency hatch, their only way out, slammed shut with the final deafening hiss of a tomb being sealed. They were trapped. The air, thick and oily, became a poison. Panic, a cold, sharp predator, sank its teeth into Jax. He saw Harrison, his best friend, drop to his knees, choking, his face a mask of terror in the demonic orange glow of burning cable insulation. This was it. The unsinkable ship was their coffin. Their careers, their dreams, their very lives would be extinguished a mile beneath the ice. Their last moments a desperate, futile gasp for air that wasn't there. Through the roaring chaos, a new sound cut through. Clang. Scrape. Clang. It was methodical, rhythmic, impossibly calm. It was the sound of a single man working against a warped steel wall. A voice, clear and steady, pierced the smoke. "Cover your mouths! Get low!" It was Silas Thorne, just Doc, the quiet medic from some backwoods town in West Virginia who rarely spoke a word. He shouldn't have been there. His station was in the sick bay. But Silas knew more than anatomy. He knew machinery, he knew pressure, he knew dying. He hadn't followed protocol. He had grabbed a fire axe and a pry bar from a damage control locker and had gone straight to the source of the screams. He ignored the jammed hatch and went for a reinforced maintenance panel beside it, a place no one in the academy would ever have considered a doorway. He worked with a terrifying focus, his silhouette a frantic shadow against the growing inferno. Sparks flew as the axe bit into steel. The heat was so intense, the bulkhead began to glow a dull red. Inside, Jax and Harrison were fading, the world narrowing to a pinprick of light. Jax's last conscious thought was of the futility of it all, of the sheer stupid waste. Then the panel exploded inward in a shower of sparks. A figure wreathed in smoke and flame crawled through the jagged opening. It was Silas. He wasn't wearing a full fire suit, just his standard-issue jacket, which was already smoldering at the shoulders. He grabbed Jax by the collar, his grip like iron, and dragged him through the opening. He went back into the furnace for Harrison. He didn't shout. He just acted. He was a force of nature, a quiet, unstoppable will against the chaos. When Jax woke up, the world was white. The sick bay. The thrum of the engines was steady again. The air was clean. He saw Harrison in the opposite bunk, alive. And then he saw Silas. Doc Thorne was sitting on a stool, his arms and hands wrapped in thick white bandages. A Navy surgeon was carefully cutting away the burned fabric of his jacket. Underneath, his skin was a raw, blistered ruin. He had taken the fire meant for them. Later, when the captain came to award him the Navy Cross on the spot, Silas just shook his head. "No, sir. Thank you, sir. But every man did his duty." He refused the medal. He refused the story. He wanted no part of the glory. He just wanted to do his job. When his tour ended, he melted back into the America he came from, leaving behind nothing but a legend whispered in the submarine cores, and 2 young officers who now owed him a debt greater than life itself. That debt was now walking across the immaculate lawns of Annapolis, embodied in the form of a 4-star admiral. The memory didn't fade as Jax drew closer to the gate. It burned brighter, fueling his resolve. The rules, the regulations, the neatly typed guest lists, they were an insult. The entire system he now commanded was, in this moment, an obstacle to true justice. He saw the young Marine guard stiffen as he approached, saw the confusion in his eyes. He saw Silas Thorne still standing by the wall, his posture unchanged, expecting nothing. The Admiral reached the gate. He didn't pause. He didn't ask for it to be opened. He unlatched it himself, the heavy iron groaning in protest. He stepped out onto the public sidewalk, leaving the world of curated honor behind him. He was no longer just an admiral, he was Jax, the terrified lieutenant, standing before the man who had walked through fire for him. And in the silence that followed, before the first word was spoken, before the first salute was rendered, the entire world seemed to shrink to the space between these two men. The hero everyone knew, and the hero no one remembered. The collision was coming, a reckoning 57 years in the making, and it was about to stop the world in its tracks. The world, for a long, drawn-out moment, held its breath. The machinery of state-sponsored grief ground to a halt. The young Marine guard stood frozen, his mind unable to process the scene. A 4-star admiral, a living legend, had just unlatched a security gate to stand face-to-face with the forgotten old man he'd dismissed moments before. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Whispers died in the throats of senators. Cameras lowered. For the first time all day, no one was looking at the flag-draped casket. Everyone was looking at the gate. Admiral Jax McKinley stood on the public pavement, his back to the ceremony, his entire being focused on the man before him. He saw the flicker of fear and confusion in Silas Thorne's eyes, the instinct to retreat, to vanish back into the shadows where he'd lived for half a century. Jax knew he had one chance to anchor him here, to pull him from the past and into the light. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't speak. Instead, he drew himself to his full height, his shoulders squaring into the rigid posture of absolute respect. Then, his white-gloved hand sliced through the air, clean and sharp, stopping at his temple in a salute so powerful, so filled with 57 years of unspoken gratitude, that it seemed to bend the very air around them. It was a salute reserved for presidents, for Medal of Honor recipients, for the highest echelons of heroism, and he was giving it to a forgotten medic on a public sidewalk. "Doc?" Jax's voice was a low rumble, thick with emotion, yet as clear as a ship's bell in the fog. "It's good to see you. We were hoping you'd make it." Silas flinched at the old nickname. His mouth opened, but only a dry rasp emerged. "Sir, I just came to pay respects." "You're here to do more than that," Jax said, finally lowering his hand but not his gaze. His eyes were locked on Silas, bridging the decades. "Harrison left instructions. He said, if Doc comes, it's not my funeral anymore. It's his." He extended a hand, not for a handshake, but as an invitation. "Your place is with us, Silas. It always was." He led Silas through the gate. The sea of crisp blue and white uniforms parted before them as if by an invisible force. The whispers were gone, replaced by a wave of stunned, reverent silence. Jax didn't lead him to a seat in the back. He walked him down the center aisle, past rows of admirals and captains who stared in disbelief, their minds racing through service records and histories, trying and failing to place the face of this unassuming old man. Jax stopped in the front row, before a woman in her 50s, her face a portrait of elegant, contained grief. It was Eleanor Vance, the Admiral's daughter. She looked from her father's casket to the approaching Admiral, and then to the stranger beside him, her eyes clouded with confusion. "Eleanor," Jax said softly, his voice gentle but firm, "I'd like you to meet an old shipmate of your father's. This is Corpsman Silas Thorne." He paused, letting the introduction settle before he delivered the words that would redefine her entire life. "Eleanor, this is the man who saved your father's life. The reason you and all of us had him for 57 more years." Eleanor Vance's composure shattered. A small, sharp gasp escaped her lips. Her manicured hand flew to her mouth, her eyes fixed on Silas's weathered face, searching it for a story she'd never been told, for a piece of her father she had never known. Silas just gave a small, almost apologetic nod, his discomfort with the attention palpable. But Jax was already moving. He strode to the podium, his purpose now absolute. He looked down at the official, carefully prepared eulogy, filled with dates and battles and accomplishments. He picked up the pages, held them for a moment, and then deliberately placed them aside, unseen. He gripped the sides of the lectern, his knuckles white, and leaned into the microphone. His voice boomed across the silent assembly, a voice accustomed to commanding fleets, now charged with a raw and personal truth. "We are here today to honor a hero," he began, his gaze sweeping over the powerful faces before him. "We've read the citations. We've seen the medals. We know the history of Admiral Harrison Vance. But I am here to tell you that you don't know the most important story of all." He turned and gestured toward Silas, who now stood beside Eleanor, looking like a man who wished the earth would swallow him whole. "History will tell you that Harrison Vance's career was forged in the great naval battles of the last half-century. History is wrong. It was forged in a fire, a mile beneath the Arctic ice. It was forged in a moment when death was certain. I know, because I was there with him." A shockwave of silence pulsed through the crowd. This was not protocol. This was a confession. This was history being rewritten in real time. "We were trapped," Jax's voice dropped, becoming intense, intimate. The air was gone. The escape hatch was sealed. We were two young officers about to become a footnote in a classified incident report. But we survived. We survived because one man, a Navy corpsman, with no thought for his own life, with nothing but his bare hands and an unshakable sense of duty, refused to let us die. He crawled through a wall of fire, dragged us from a steel coffin, and took the burns that were meant for us. He pointed again at Silas, his finger unwavering. "That man is Silas Thorne. He refused the medals. He refused the citations. He asked for nothing. He disappeared. We spent our careers accumulating honors, while he lived his life in the quiet obscurity he chose. But let me be clear. Every star on my shoulders, every star on Harrison Vance's shoulders, was earned on the foundation of that man's sacrifice. We got the glory. He got the scars." He let the words sink in. You could hear the sharp intake of breath from 100 decorated chests. The highest honor we can pay to Admiral Vance is to finally pay the debt he carried every single day of his life. To honor the man who made his life possible. Jax turned to the honor guard. "Bring the Admiral forward." He then looked directly at Silas, his voice ringing with command. "Corpsman Thorne, you will escort your shipmate. Lead your friend home." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the back, an old chief petty officer, his own face a roadmap of hard-fought years, rose slowly to his feet and rendered a salute. Then another sailor rose, then a captain, then an entire row. Within seconds, the whole assembly was on its feet, a forest of salutes, their applause breaking like a tidal wave over the quiet grounds of Annapolis. A raw, thunderous, overwhelming roar of respect, not for the admiral in the casket, but for the quiet medic who had finally been brought in from the cold. Heroes walk among us every day, their stories hidden in plain sight. If you've been moved by this moment of long overdue recognition, share this story. Let's create a wave of gratitude for all the quiet heroes whose sacrifices built the world we live in. The roar of the crowd eventually faded, but for Eleanor Vance, standing beside Silas Thorne, 1,000 questions were just beginning to thunder in her mind. The world had just been told the story of a hero, but she, for the first time, was seeing the man who held the key to her father's soul. And she knew she had to hear the rest of the story. The thunder of applause had faded to a reverent hush, but for Eleanor Vance, the world had never been louder. Walking beside Silas Thorne in the funeral procession, each step was a tremor, shaking the foundations of a life built on the myth of her father. She had always known Admiral Harrison Vance as a monument, a cold granite figure carved from duty and success, a man more comfortable with maps and fleets than with the untidy emotions of a daughter. He was a hero to the world, but a stranger to her. Now, this humble medic, this ghost from a forgotten war, had walked out of the past and handed her the key to the man she never knew. The world saw a hero being honored. She saw the beginning of an answer to a question she hadn't even known how to ask. The formal ceremony at the gravesite was a blur of folded flags and solemn prayers. Dignitaries offered her their condolences, their words smooth and practiced, but their eyes kept flicking to the old man in the faded uniform who stood beside her. A place of honor no one could comprehend. When the final volley of the 21-gun salute echoed across the Severn River and the crowd began to thin, Eleanor didn't move. Her grief for the father she'd lost was now tangled with a fierce, desperate need to understand the man she'd just found. She turned to Silas, who was gazing at the new headstone, his expression unreadable. His duty was done. She could feel him preparing to retreat, to dissolve back into the quiet anonymity he had chosen for his life. She couldn't let him go. Not yet. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "The compass. The one you were holding at the gate. Why did he give it to you?" Silas looked down at his empty hands, as if still feeling the weight of the silver object he'd just left on the stone. He seemed reluctant, his gaze distant. "It was a long time ago, ma'am." "Please," Eleanor insisted, her voice cracking with a lifetime of unspoken need. "I spent my life trying to understand him. He was distant, driven. I always thought it was because I wasn't enough." That raw, painful confession seemed to reach Silas in a way the Admiral's speech had not. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and in her eyes he saw the reflection of the immense burden her father had carried. He gave a slow sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the deep ocean. "It wasn't you, ma'am," he said softly. "It was never you. The fire on the Triton, didn't just scar us, it reforged us, especially your father. Before that day, he was a brilliant officer. After that day, he started the journey to becoming a great man. The compass wasn't for saving his life. It was for what happened a week later." He paused, gathering the memory. "We were still under the ice, the whole crew on edge. We'd survived, but the ghost of that fire was in every corridor. There was a young sailor on board, a kid named Peters from Idaho. Just 18. We got a scrambled message, a family emergency. The rules were absolute, total radio silence on classified patrols. No personal traffic. The captain himself wouldn't bend that rule, But the message was for Peters. His mother was dying. Silas's eyes drifted to the horizon. I saw Peters later, huddled in a small supply closet, trying to cry without making a sound. He was just a boy, terrified and alone, 1,000,000 miles from home. And your father found him there. He was just a lieutenant then, but he had a command presence even back then. I thought he was going to read that kid the riot act, tell him to stow his grief and get back to his post. That's what the book said to do. But he didn't, Silas continued, a note of old wonder in his voice. He didn't say a word. He just sat down on a crate of sea rations in that cramped, dark closet and put a hand on that kid's shoulder. He said, "Tell me about her, son." And he just listened. For an hour, he listened while that boy poured out his heart, talking about his mom, his farm, his life back home. He gave that kid a space to grieve when the whole world and the entire U.S. Navy said he couldn't. When it was over, your father walked straight to the radio room. He threatened, he cajoled, he pulled every string he had. He risked his entire career. But he got a message patched through, a short, encrypted burst. He let Peters say goodbye to his mother before she passed. It was the single bravest act I ever saw, and there wasn't a fire or an enemy in sight. Eleanor was openly weeping now, quiet tears streaming down her face. The granite monument of her father was crumbling, revealing the warm, compassionate man hidden within. Later that night, Silas finished. He found me in the mess. He pushed that silver compass across the table. I'll never forget what he said. He told me, "Doc, this compass always points north. It shows you where to go. But in that closet today, you showed me what it means to be a leader. You pointed me true. Keep this. And if you ever see me straying from that course, you show it to me and remind me of the man I'm supposed to be." Silas looked at Eleanor, his gaze direct and kind. "He was never distant from you, ma'am. He was just trying to live up to the promise he made to himself that day, the promise to be worthy of the lives he led. The weight of that promise, it makes a man quiet. It builds walls, not to keep people out, but to protect the sacred duty within." In that moment, 50 years of feeling like a disappointment, an afterthought in a legendary life, washed away from Eleanor. The silence that had defined her relationship with her father was not an absence of love, but a presence of honor. An honor so profound, so heavy, that it had been forged in fire and sealed by an act of secret compassion for a grieving sailor in a dark closet. She finally understood. Her father hadn't been a monument. He had been a man holding a compass, desperately trying to stay true to a course set for him by a quiet medic, a long, long time ago. The story was told. The debt, at last, felt understood. For Silas Thorne, the promise he'd carried was finally delivered, not just to the grave, but to the heart of the person who needed to hear it most. He gave a final nod to Eleanor, a gesture of peace, and turned to walk away, ready to fade back into the world that had long forgotten him. But a hero's legacy is a stubborn thing, and Admiral Harrison Vance, even from beyond the grave, had left one final stunning order to ensure that the quiet valor of Silas Thorne would never be forgotten again. With the story told, a fragile peace settled over the Annapolis gravesite. The sun bled out across the horizon, leaving the sky bruised with twilight. Eleanor Vance had finally seen the soul of her father, not in his medals, but in the reflection of a quiet man's memory. For Silas Thorne, a 57-year-old promise had been fulfilled. He had carried his friend home. His duty was complete. He gave a final, slow nod to Eleanor, a gesture that was both a farewell and a blessing, and then he turned to leave. He was ready to walk back into the shadows, to become invisible again. His purpose served, but a legacy, once illuminated, casts a long shadow. As Silas reached the edge of the oak trees, he saw Admiral Jax McKinley waiting for him, a sentinel against the fading light. He was holding a thick manila envelope. "One last thing, Doc," Jax said, his voice softer now, stripped of its command. "Harrison's final orders." Silas eyed the envelope with the weariness of a man who wanted no more complications. "Jax, it's over. I did what I came to do." "Not quite," Jax replied, stepping forward and pressing the envelope into Silas's hands. "This isn't a memory. It's a future." He was very specific. "This was only to be opened after you had come, after the story was told." With hesitant fingers, Silas broke the seal. He didn't find a letter. He found a set of architectural blueprints and an officially sealed directive from the Department of the Navy. He stared at the complex drawings of a modern hospital wing, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand." "For 30 years, Jax explained, his voice filled with the pride of a friend sharing a magnificent secret. Harrison secretly funneled a fortune into a state-of-the-art facility at Walter Reed, a place for sailors and Marines, specializing in advanced burn treatments and trauma counseling. He called it Project Triton. He knew what fire does to a man, inside and out. He saw the scars on your hands that day, Doc. He never forgot them. Silas looked up from the papers, his mind reeling. The scale of it was impossible. He kept his name off of it completely, Jax continued. He wanted the work to speak for itself, but he left one final non-negotiable order in his will, a directive to the Secretary of the Navy, to be executed upon his death. Jax gently tapped a line on the document in Silas's hand. He said the facility could only be dedicated if its true inspiration was honored. He made its naming a matter of naval record. Silas's eyes, blurred by tears he didn't know he had left, struggled to focus on the bold official text. And there it was. Etched in the cold formal language of the United States Navy was the name of the new, multi-million-dollar Center for Healing, the Silas Thorne Wing for Quiet Valor. A sob, sharp and powerful, escaped from Silas's chest. The sound was torn from a place of profound, 57-year-old silence. The weight of the blueprints in his hands felt heavier than any urn. The invisible man, the forgotten medic, the ghost from a dead submarine, now had his name carved into the future. A permanent testament, not to a battle won, but to a life saved. He had refused a medal, but his friend had given him a sanctuary. "He knew you'd never accept a thing for yourself," Jax said, his own voice thick with emotion as he placed a hand on his old friend's shoulder. "So he built a legacy you couldn't refuse, one that would keep on doing your work, healing the wounded, mending the broken, long after we're all gone. Your one act of courage, Doc, it never stopped rippling." The greatest act in this story was not the rescue in the fire. It was the 57 years that followed. It was the lifelong, unspoken gratitude of Admiral Harrison Vance, who spent a career trying to become a man worthy of being saved. That is the true, profound lesson of quiet valor. It is not a single moment of bravery, but a lifetime of honoring the debts we carry in our souls. A hero's legacy isn't just what they did. It is what their actions inspire others to do, long after the echoes of the crisis have faded. That legacy, that responsibility to remember, now falls to us. Time is relentless. It turns heroes into ghosts and stories into forgotten whispers. Look at your own life. There is a story you carry, a debt of gratitude you owe to a parent, a mentor, a friend, someone whose quiet sacrifice became the foundation you now stand on. Do not wait for a funeral to see their value. Their memory is not a monument to be visited from a distance. It is a fire to be carried forward. Pick up the phone. Write the letter. Make the visit. Ask the question you've always wanted to ask. Record their story in their own words. Because a story unheard is a hero forgotten. The greatest honor you can pay to the people who shaped you is to become the keeper of their legacy, to ensure their fire continues to warm the world. Our mission here at NX Incredible Stories is to be a home for these fires. We believe that remembering is an act of courage. If you believe that too, then subscribe to our channel. Help us find these stories, honor these memories, and ensure that no act of quiet valor is ever truly lost.